We're really pleased to have with us today Dr. David Cornby, who will be talking about Aspiration and Reality, a sustainable roads programme for London. When we hear words transport and London, those of us who don't live in the place automatically think of things like the Tube, like Crossrail, like all those sort of major projects. But in fact, if you take the whole of the conurbation, far more people and far more passenger kilometres are on the roads than on most of the rail networks. So David is redressing that balance today, talking about a roads policy for London, and more importantly, a sustainable roads policy for London. I have to admit I'm going to read this because David's CV is just slightly complicated and I wouldn't want to get it wrong. He's a consultant, a former director of Conn & Buchanan. He's chairman of the RAC Foundation and a non-executive director of the Abellio Group, which was formerly Ned Railways. At various times since 1996, he's been a board member and chairman of the Strategic Rail Authority, chairman of the Docklands Light Railway, a board member of Transport for London, chairman of the British Tourist Authority, a member of the A12 Commission of Inquiry, appointed by Essex County Council, and has been leading a review into the winter resilience of England's transport systems. I notice it just covers England, not Scotland, and possibly not even the bit of England I live in. He's board member for Greenwich Waterfront Regeneration Agency, and in the 1990s was founder and deputy chairman of the South London Economic Development Alliance. Prior to 1996, David was for 12 years a main board director of Sainsbury's, first as logistics director, so therefore presumably has an interest in roads, and then as joint managing director responsible for company operations. Between 1970 to 1984, he was director of operations research, chief planning officer, and then a board member at London Transport. For 6 years, he was managing director of London Buses, and earlier in his career, he was an economic advisor to the Ministry of Transport. I think you'll agree that we couldn't have found a more appropriate speaker to talk about a sustainable roads policy for London. So, David, may I offer you the lectern?
Thank you for that introduction. I think it's important that anybody like me talking about roads should declare, first of all, that I'm a multimodal chap. I'm not taking what you might call a Toad of Toad Hall approach to the issue of roads. Evidence-based, I hope. Well, I'm very grateful to the organisers, the Royal Academy of Engineering, for inviting me to come and speak at the London Design Festival on this subject. Two mayors and Transport for London have overseen huge improvements in London's transport system in the last decade. Roger mentioned the Tube. So many people think about the Tube when they think of London. But we've seen a significant upgrading of the Tube, better quality and more reliable bus services with a denser network, central London congestion charging, Oyster card bringing ticket integration across all modes, including National Rail. We now have the London Overground, or most of it, a new inner orbital rail network, cycle lanes and an ambitious cycling strategy. Well, the list goes on. And one of the consequences of this is a 5% shift from car to public transport, an achievement that is unique among cities in the UK and probably in Europe as well. So why do we need a road strategy? Don't all those improvements to the public transport system and new cycling opportunities sort out congestion and reduce the need for roads? The answer, in a nutshell, is no. Now, the theme of this festival is reducing carbon emissions. And although that's not my main theme this evening, it's an area that I'm interested in as well. And I want to start with a quick look at how this objective bears on transport in a great city, particularly so far as road vehicles are concerned. I'll then go on to look at why roads and car travel are important for London and what experience road users have of the performance of the road network. I'll then look at how the mayoral policies for transport bear on these issues and end up with a couple of ideas for discussion. Now, the essential objectives of the Mayor's transport strategy are set out here: to support economic growth and cope with the population growth, ensure quality of life in this great city, and access to opportunities for getting to work and getting on with life and for leisure, and reducing transport's contribution to climate change, which should, of course, be in line with the UK climate change commitments, and improving the resilience of the transport system. I think we can all sign up to these well-balanced objectives. And of course, as I mentioned, there is a focus in this festival, sponsored by the RAE, to reduce our carbon footprint. Well, the UK sector target for transport is minus 22% carbon emissions on the 1990 base to be achieved by 2020. Current policy envisages achieving this with about a 50-50 split between what we call demand-side measures and technology-driven efficiency improvements in vehicles. As I say, I'm not planning to cover more about this evening. My own view is that achieving this objective does need action on all these fronts. Yet we need to be realistic about what can be achieved through travel behaviour change. And meanwhile, I believe a real momentum has established in reducing the CO2 emissions of cars, both by improvements, quite radical improvements, to the performance of the internal combustion engine, as well as, of course, huge interest in electric vehicles and hybrids of electric and petrol internal combustion engines. So returning to London and its transport system, I'm going to get you to think about two Londons, which I call Spider London and Bagel London. Now, London is conventionally split into central London, bounded by the Circle Line and extending to the Elephant and Castle in the south, inner London, which are the red boroughs there, defined by these boroughs, and outer London, which are the mauve boroughs around. Now, I want to define Spider London, that's the one on the right, as the central area, together with the radial networks of rail, tube, bus and roads, which bring commuters into central London. It looks like a body, central London, with long legs, all the radial routes into the centre, hence Spider London. The other is Bagel London, a fat ring with a small hole in the middle, which is central London. Bagel London consists of inner and outer London, less the radial transport links into the centre, and between them they make up the whole of Greater London. Now, these two Londons have very different characteristics and very different patterns of travel. Spider London has a small proportion of the population, but a quarter of London's jobs, most of which are filled by commuters travelling into the centre. Over 80% of journeys within and into central London are by public transport. And as we know, central London, coupled with Canary Wharf, is the powerhouse of the London economy. So, of course, efficient and attractive public transport is critical to sustain it. But the vast majority of London's population and 3/4 of London's jobs are in Bagel London. 83% of London's travel is in Bagel London. And most Londoners who live there don't go anywhere near central London from 1 month to the next, except perhaps for a day out, or to travel into and then out of London by train. What's really significant is that 67% of all that travel in Bagel London is by car and taxi. Now, not surprisingly, the Mayor's transport strategy envisages a good deal of investment and ongoing support for public transport in all its forms. In fact, over 80% of the TfL business plan provides for expenditure on public transport. Yet in spite of the special character and high performance of the central London economy, about half of London's GDP is actually earned in Bagel London. And given the dependence on the road network, I ask, is this the most balanced and effective use of funds? Let's break Bagel London down into inner and outer London. How does modal use vary between them? In inner London, a third of travel is by bus, interestingly, and half by car. This reflects the denser bus network and the higher frequencies and the greater traffic congestion. The London Overground, especially when the final link in the circle is completed around South London to Clapham Junction, does provide a step change in rail accessibility within inner London and will undoubtedly lift the rail share a few percentage points. In outer London and between inner and outer London, the car is dominant. Interestingly, TfL's research shows that the patterns of travel and the mode shares in outer London are more like those in large cities like Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Newcastle and Sheffield, except for the bus use, which is higher in London. But why is car mode share so high in Bagel London? And given the level of congestion on the road network, can anything be done about it? First of all, the pattern of travel across Bagel London is very geographically dispersed, so that rail, for example, can never offer an alternative for more than a very modest proportion of those journeys, especially within outer London. Second, because of the geographical dispersion, the density of this movement in outer London will rarely justify the provision of a dense, high-frequency bus network, except on key corridors into the major outer London centres, such as Croydon, Kingston, Ilford, Harrow, Heathrow, and so on. Inner London generally can provide a dense enough network for significant bus share, but bus becomes uncompetitive and inconvenient for typical medium-distance journeys in inner and outer London, journeys that, in Spider London, are captured and accommodated by rail. And this is all conveyed and captured by looking at accessibility by public transport. Now, TfL themselves map public transport accessibility. This shows that great swathes of Bagel London have modest or poor accessibility to public transport. That's the blue and the darker blue colours. Compare that with public transport accessibility in central London, some radial corridors, and that's your Spider London, and some major town centres, with yellow, red and black indicating progressive, higher levels of public transport accessibility. So a majority of Bagel London's personal movement is dependent on the road network and always will be, whatever improvements in public transport accessibility and performance can be made at the margin. But personal travel is not all the traffic on the road network. Over London as a whole, business transport is significant. 1 in 6 vehicles on London's roads is commercial vehicles. 1 in 8 of those are vans. And to that, add 6 percentage points of the car traffic, that's 6 out of the 78, is for travel during work. So even if we exclude commuting, over 20% of London's road traffic is directly involved in business activity, even excluding commuting. Here the opportunities for modal shift are relatively small. The light vans, for example, are delivering parcels and other items to shops and homes. And light vans are used for servicing premises, utilities, telecoms, servicing offices, and both commercial and domestic servicing. Some heavy goods vehicle trips can be reconfigured and reorganised to minimise use of the road system, but only to a limited extent. And car use for work carries a premium time value. So, with all this use of the road network that is very largely driven by the geography and the circumstances, let's look at the performance of the road network. What level of service does the road network offer its users? This shows the worsening trend in congestion over 4 decades, measured in minutes per kilometre lost compared with an uncongested network. 2 minutes lost per kilometre, which is where we are certainly for central and inner London, on the right-hand side, doesn't sound much, but 2 minutes per kilometre reduces an average uncongested speed of, say, 20 miles an hour to under 10, and virtually doubles the time of a typical 30-minute journey. But it's the lack of reliability or predictability of journey times that's the real killer. Any uncertainty in journey times makes people allow for delay, and this builds into the planned time of the journey. This graph shows the percentage of journeys completed within 5 minutes of the average, taking a typical 30-minute journey as the benchmark. In the worst period, 1 in 6 journeys in the peaks get delayed by more than 5 minutes from their usual average time. We all know the frustration caused by the roadworks, particularly the intensive roadworks we've seen in the last few years, and we know how much the operation of the road network is on a knife edge and vulnerable to incidents, emergencies, and so on. So, how is the Mayor's transport strategy addressing the needs of Bagel London, and particularly these issues of road network performance, congestion delay, and unreliability, which also affect the economy of Bagel London? Now, the first thing to acknowledge, as I've already mentioned, is that the London Overground, providing a whole new set of links within inner London and between inner and outer London, is delivering a major improvement in public transport accessibility that's relevant to the needs of Bagel London. Secondly, the whole of London is benefiting in a sustained way from the bus improvements of the last 10 years. That said, the plan for the road network, on which Bagel London depends so heavily, is largely at a tactical level. The main thrust of the Mayor's strategy as it affects roads is smoothing traffic flow. A mayoral phrase, this laudable aim translates into a practical programme of reducing the unpredictability of journey times. And a broadly based programme of action has been assembled to manage the road network more effectively and to give effect to this aim. It also recognises that congestion arises both from planned interventions, that's roadworks, and unplanned interventions, emergencies, accidents, incidents, and so on. A range of measures is being corralled to deal with better operational management of the network, including reviewing traffic signal timings, extending the scoot system, junction redesign, including removal of traffic signals, and implementing a corridor management approach. Planned interventions is, I've hinted, a polite term for roadworks, and the Mayor has an increasing number of tools to control the disruption caused by roadworks, such as the London Permit Scheme, a new code of conduct with improved enforcement, and even lane rental and overstay charges are being considered. Finally, improving traffic monitoring and incident management will help reduce the impact of unplanned events and emergencies, supplemented by better and more available real-time information for the public and for road users. And all this will be supported by monitoring and reporting delays on a key corridor basis, And in the spirit of the age, TfL will be placing all this corridor performance data on their website, complete with colour coding to highlight the problem areas. The Mayor's Transport Strategy also provides for the possibility of local road capacity enhancements in certain cases where a number of criteria can be fulfilled, particularly sustainable development and regeneration and relief of congestion. There is, however, little or no funding provided for this, and there are no examples in the Mayor's Transport Strategy of plans to manifest that approach, with the exception of river crossings east of Tower Bridge. Now, this is interesting. A clear commitment is being given in the Mayor's Transport Strategy to a package of river crossings to address both the poor connectivity in the Thames Gateway and the congestion on the existing crossings. Key features are a new fixed link at Silvertown to relieve the Blackwall Tunnel and to improve local links, upgrading the Woolwich Ferry and possibly a new modern ferry at Galleon's Reach further east, and consideration of a longer-term fixed link at Galleon's Reach, but don't mention Thames Gateway Bridge in the same breath. Rail developments, both delivered and in hand, also improve connectivity where rail is a usable alternative. Although not part of the strategy as published, I believe an essential feature of this would be tolling the Blackwall Tunnel, both to manage demand down and address the appalling knock-on effects throughout the road networks on both sides of the river, but most particularly to raise revenue to build the new Silvertown link and to lock in the benefits. You see, sustaining the toll after the new capacity is introduced does provide the opportunity to lock in the benefits of providing that capacity, maintaining reasonable journey times and therefore maintaining the connectivity. In the same way, I would go forward with the Galleon's Reach ferry, tolling this to raise revenue to upgrade the Woolwich ferry, and then introducing a toll on that when upgraded, again to manage demand and generate funds for further local improvements. Well, this programme is focused and commendable, but is it enough? The object of the Mayor's Transport Strategy, as it applies to roads, is to improve journey time reliability, but not journey times as such. Does it matter that for some parts of Bagel London, particularly inner north and inner south London, the road network is so congested that journeys regularly average well below 10 miles an hour? This has a real impact on connectivity, the sense of so near but so far, which encourages businesses to move out and makes these locations unattractive for economic regeneration and jobs growth. And I saw that during my time involved with the South London Economic Development Alliance. This leads me to a more general point. Reliability and predictability on the road network does matter, and the focus of this will be beneficial. But the ability for those who need to use the road network to get around London within a reasonable time and to achieve the sense of connectivity on which business and economic activity depends is also important. Now, this is definitely not a plea for major capacity enhancements to the road network. I've been around too long as a transport planner not to comprehend the nature of the pent-up demand and the extent to which some congestion returns as more people and businesses respond to the easing of the network and a new equilibrium gets found. One approach would be to improve connectivity across the road network by setting a target average speed, perhaps varying for different parts of London, and then identifying and evaluating what measures would be necessary to achieve that, whether of local capacity enhancement or of demand management, or both. For example, TfL data tells us that the average speeds in different parts of London are Central London 10 miles an hour, Inner London 12.5 and Outer London 18.5. Now these averages conceal great variations in average speeds in different parts of London. Again, acknowledged in the TfL data, which shows that in Bagel London, congestion is highest and therefore average speeds lowest in inner North and inner South London. A target minimum speed of, say, 10 miles an hour in inner London and 15 miles an hour in outer London, averaged over 1 or 2 mile stretches, would flush out those particularly congested parts of the network and focus consideration either on local capacity enhancements or on demand management measures, or both. You see, the approach to river crossings is a good example of this approach, especially with the suggestions for using tolling to manage demand and lock in the benefits of new capacity when they're provided. And although it's sensitive, I believe that congestion charging has a serious role to play in addressing local congestion challenges in Bagel London to improve connectivity and delay black spots, either instead of or alongside modest capacity enhancements. And these tools could help to deliver a target minimum speed. It's no secret that an area charge, similar in concept to the Central London charge, was being considered for Greenwich Town Centre a year or so ago, offering substantial environmental as well as traffic benefits. The diversionary effects have to be taken into account, but this is an example of selective measures targeting specific problem areas, which I would support as part of a strategy of setting target minimum speeds to provide a more uniform connectivity by road across London. So in conclusion, we need to understand that London outside central London, that's my Bagel London, is heavily dependent on the road network, and that the opportunity to influence modal choice to relieve congestion, important and worthwhile, is generally limited. What the Mayor's transport strategy has to say about the road network is focused on smoothing traffic flow, meaning improving journey time reliability across the network with a coordinated programme which should deliver welcome improvements. Where a case can be made, modest road capacity improvements can be made, but there seems to be no funding provided for this. The one clear plan for the river crossings, with a commitment to a Silvertown crossing at Blackwall and ferry developments around the Woolwich area. I believe that the proposals for the river crossings should be funded by tolls, which will also serve to manage demand and lock in the benefits when completed. And this gets round the lack of availability of general funds for road improvements in London. And I believe that other pockets of high congestion and low average speed on the network in Bagel London also need attention, as they provide a real barrier to connectivity and to sustaining and growing local economies. That's why I propose a target minimum speed, different for inner and outer London, and lower than the current average speeds, as a benchmark against which to highlight and flush out particular problem parts of the network. Consideration should then be focused on measures, both of local capacity enhancement and demand management, which reduce local congestion and improve connectivity, but with the aim of inhibiting the backfill of traffic. With network averages at 12.5 miles an hour for inner London and 18 miles an hour for outer London, I propose an initial target minimum of 10 miles an hour for the inner London network and 15 for the outer London network, to provide at least a first assessment of the scale and nature of the challenges. With such an approach, I believe we can recognise the dependence of Bagel London on the road network and give some attention, alongside the current plans to improve the predictability of journey times, to those parts of the network where particularly low average speeds and substantial regular delays really inhibit connectivity and the sustainability of the local economy and jobs. Thank you.
Can I have the first suggestion?
Two quite separate questions. First about river crossings. My impression as an intermittent user of the Blackwall Tunnel is that it's bedeviled by closures, perhaps because it's old. Is it, as a point of information, true that the tolls on such as the Severn Bridge and the Dotford Bridge were supposed to be temporary until the bridge was notionally paid for, and if so, should they not have been stopped by now? And arising from that, if you're proposing more tolls on the likes of Blackwall, will it not just arouse public irritation for no particular gain? And I'm interested in this connection in your Silvertown, presumably bridge, if that's what a fixed link means.
Tunnel.
Doesn't?
It'll be a tunnel.
A bit tunnel. Well, fair enough. Same effect, I would have thought. But and just one other point I'll toss out on the subject of river crossings is that as an intermittent user of the Woolwich Free Ferry, as it's locally known, throughput could be increased, surely, by putting an extra boat on. That is one group of questions. My other concerns outer London and the reliance you have demonstrated on car. That is presumably because people are dissatisfied with, frustrated with, or sceptical of public transport provision. Would it not be possible to engineer greater bus transport to meet some of that demand? In other words, in presumably peripheral journeys rather than into and out of centre. And it's also interesting that you say that many journeys into and out of centre are by car, whereas one would think that the buses or particularly train would come into their own for that. And just one final point, could one not achieve more by cheapening suburban rail travel so that it's used more?
Thank you. So I think the first issue was about tolls. I seem to remember that when the income tax was first introduced, it was to pay for a war against France, wasn't it, several hundred years ago, as a temporary measure.
Of course we don't fight France these days. No, of course not. Thank you for those points, and you've raised some very good points there. First of all, on the Blackwall Tunnel itself, some of the infrastructure is very old, and as a local resident, because I live in Blackheath, which is just off the south end of the tunnel, I'm very aware of the closures that take place. You've got two types. You've got the nighttime closures, which are running virtually for the whole of this year on the northbound tunnel, because it was opened in 1897 and seems to need an awful lot of maintenance and rebuild and refurb and regrade and upgrade and etc. There are no planned closures during the day, but of course, because of the nature of the operation, it's very vulnerable to accidents in the tunnel, which can, once every 2 or 3 weeks, bring the tunnel to a halt during the rush hour. So it certainly functions. It functions well. It does its job, except for the nighttime closures. But the demand is excessive, and the nature of the geography of the network means that people tolerate both very long queues and therefore long travel times and quite a degree of unreliability. The point about tolls, and you mentioned the Severn crossing and the Dartford crossing, and this gets into a general area of people's attitudes towards charging for the use of roads anyway. It seems to be, from research and experience, people are more willing to pay for using bits of road, bridges, bypasses and so on, if they feel the money is being used to improve the transport system. And my whole strategy about introducing tolls on the Blackwall is you would use that money to build the Silvertown link, without which I don't think the Silvertown link will get built for 25 or 30 years, because A, it's expensive, and B, TfL's budget, like everybody else's budget at the moment, is being very heavily squeezed. And there's a lot of committed expenditure on the rail side, which is demanding of TfL's budget. Of course, that is how the toll for the Dartford crossings was originally justified, and you are perfectly fair to raise the question, when it's all been paid for, quotes, unquotes, why does the toll carry on? Well, this is where the planners have to look slightly sheepish and say, well, we'd like to keep the toll in place, please, for two reasons. One, to continue to give us a revenue stream in order to do other things, and secondly, in order to manage demand, and it is powerful as a way of locking in the benefits of the capacity you create. If you build a Silvertown link with tolls, and then you take the tolls off when it's open, the whole thing is going to fill up again, probably to the level of congestion it was before. The value of the toll there is to manage the demand down so you get more free flow conditions, you get the benefit of having put the extra capacity in, and still a very large number of people are able to benefit from it. Now, that may not seem a very clear argument right at the beginning, but I think that's a legitimate strategy. Yes, put an extra ferry, an extra boat on the free ferry at Woolwich, but the potential demand is much higher than can be satisfied by one extra boat. Hence the plan, which I support, of looking for a modern ferry, that's a much wider ferry with much higher capacity and a proper road access, just downstream from Woolwich at Galleon's Reach. But toll that in order to pay for upgrading Woolwich and paying for itself, and again to manage demand. You were wondering why there wasn't the opportunity to make substantial improvements to public transport in outer London and why the car use was so high. In my talk, I was trying to explain that there are several factors that mitigate against many car users choosing public transport for journeys in outer London particularly. The typical journey length means that even the best bus service, the most direct one, and there aren't many, is going to be uncompetitive in terms of the journey time. But the other problem is that the density of travel is so dispersed that you cannot, under any reasonably economic basis, provide a bus system and a bus network that would compete with the car for all the huge variety, geographical variety of journeys that people make. That is the characteristic of outer London, and to a less extent inner London, and absolutely not the characteristic of central London and spider London, because you've got very high concentrations of demand which justify not only providing high frequency, high capacity bus system, but support the rail network. So it's really to do with the hugely different density of travel and what is economic to provide.
Thank you. Tony.
I'm Tony Ridley, I'm a fellow. David and I have known each other a very long time. When I came in this evening, I said to him impolitely, "Are you going to tell us anything new?" And he said, "Well, I think I may be." He definitely has, and I congratulate you on that. It's very, very stimulating. Thank you, David. Anyone who is involved in transport policy and network development knows that transport is politics. Would you like to discuss the political feasibility of your proposals?
Very good question, Tony, and I should say for those who know less about Tony's background than I do, that Tony himself was a top transport planner in London many years ago, and actually ran the Underground for many years, not so many years ago. So Tony's familiarity with both the public transport and the road system in London is as great, if not greater, than mine. Political feasibility. Well, let's look at the features. The two proposals I am making One is to use tolls to help build the river crossings and possibly the use of congestion charge in other areas. At a headline level, horrors, you could never do it. And I'm not saying that it would be very politically easy to start to charge tolls on the Blackwall Tunnel. But I do think, as I was saying to the earlier questioner, that if you were able to tie these, tie the revenue to the commitment to building the Silvertown Link and a similar package for the ferries, I think it would make it more palatable, and I think a brave mayor could just about do it. The other proposal of setting target minimum speeds for the network and identifying what you would need to do in order to deliver those target minimum speeds, I think could raise all the usual concerns about building new roads, they fill up as soon as they open, etc., which has a degree of legitimacy in the concerns that many have about road building generally. What I've been really trying to do with this concept of target minimum speeds is finding a middle way between, on the one hand, assuming you can get everybody out of cars onto public transport by simply improving the service and making them cheaper, which is not true, to the other end, which is the only other thing you can do is either to road price the entire network or build lots of roads. I'm really trying to find a practical policy in the middle that addresses some of the worst bits of the network with a modest target, which I believe you could fulfill by a relatively modest set of capacity enhancements plus some area-based demand management. Now, I haven't tried any of this out. I don't know whether you could, whether the numbers work, but I think that the way I've deliberately set it as a modest midway proposal, I hope would make it a bit more politically acceptable.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm John Collins. I work for the Department for Transport. Thank you for your very enlightening presentation. When considering Bagel London, I suppose one of the more important things to consider is its crust, i.e. the M25, which of course for many people is actually how they get away and around London. Obviously that doesn't come under the jurisdiction of the Mayoralty, but I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on how to manage the M25, which is one of the worst performing roads on the strategic road network for JTR. And it is something that at the moment is being dealt with in perhaps a more traditionalist predict and provide manner, although managed motorways are further down the line and maybe that might offer more active traffic management techniques. My second question is, you rightly point out the differences in density between inner and outer London are the reason why public transport will probably never be viable for most journeys. Could we apply more stringent land use planning policies to develop transport corridors and hubs that enable the demand to be generated to justify the building of a third orbital railway or improved bus links?
Thank you. Very good questions. On the M25, well, first of all, we all know, and you know better than the rest of us, I'm sure, that the Highways Agency's strategy is very much focused on getting more out of the networks we've got, rather than increasing capacity, and I think that's very understandable. And a range of techniques, including particularly focusing on the managed motorway like the M42 in the Birmingham area, are examples of how you can do that. And indeed, the bits of the M25 which have got active speed management now do demonstrate that if you manage speeds down to 60 or 50 miles an hour, or sometimes 40, under very heavy traffic conditions, then you can smooth the traffic flow, to use the Boris phrase, increase throughput and improve journey time reliability. But I can't help wondering whether a bit more strategic approach isn't required for the M25, because the demand is very high, and to an extent the fact that the demand is high and the flow is high is solving some of London's problems too, of course, so we should in a way celebrate the fact that it is doing such a big job. I was involved last year in my Colin Buchanan role in leading a project for the Milton Keynes South Midlands area in looking at what transport strategies were going to support their growth plans, because they are one of the big growth areas, as you know, in England. And the issue that began to be of concern there is, and I'll explain why it's relevant to the M25 issue, that when Milton Keynes, for example, was planned and Northampton was designed as a growth plan, both of them are very close to the M1, and people thought, oh, this is a great place to put expansion, because accessibility is very high and they're both on the rail system too. But that's the seed of a major problem for them now, because as the Highways Agency seeks to manage the very high demand on the M1, it's likely that they will start to implement policies which disadvantage short-distance trips, i.e. ramp metering. I believe that you should have an entry toll as well on some of the motorway approach roads. In that particular case, it could substantially disadvantage the economic activity in the kind of Luton, Dunstable, Milton Keynes, Northampton corridor, because a substantial proportion of those intra-regional journeys actually take place on the M1. But I don't think that's a problem so much on the M25, except one or two segments. And I believe a more strategic approach to the M25 would be to put some form of either physical or financial metering of access to the M25 on the approach roads. For example, if you charged £1 to get on the M25, that would not deter long and medium distance journeys because it's a small proportion of the cost, but it would deter some of the junction hopping, which we know is a major cause of congestion on certain sections, particularly the southwest corner and the western edge and little bits around the east where the Dartford crossings are. So I would think there are solutions of that kind that ought to be tried, and I think are going to be tried by the HA, which will be a bit more strategic than simply trying to manage what you've got on there now. And your point on land use planning corridors, yes, of course, and you see examples in continental Europe and I think particularly in Scandinavia, where, and one or two in the UK too, where new developments have been created at a density and at a location which will generate, out of choice, a much higher public transport use. The trouble is, we're dealing with an existing settlement, and even 10 years of development in London is only going to have a pinprick effect on the density of movement and the way in which you can focus demand onto corridors that you could serve by public transport. I mean, it's a kind of, I wouldn't be starting from here point, really, I'm afraid. It's a good, it's an essential and very worthwhile theory, but very difficult to make any traction with in a very large, settled urban area like London.
Thank you.
Yeah, Thames Gateway, perhaps.
I think we've got time for 2 short questions or 1 long one. So could you make it a short question, please?
You're very kind, Roger. Depends on the length of the answers too, doesn't it?
Well, first of all, thanks for such an interesting lecture. I was very interested of the roads policy, and I haven't seen anything regarding if the London buses network, if we could do something regarding to make much more efficient London buses network. Well, for the things that I have seen as a commuter with a bicycle or as a user, it is, I think that we could make the network slightly more efficient. If we can try to go through Oxford Street, it is all full of buses, mostly stop, and other hubs as well. It is any studies that TfL is doing, like trying to optimize the network using like local networks, as well telecoms studies, like to try to make the buses maybe not such a long distance, maybe covering a reduced distance and more buses to increase the throughput between passengers and points. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, the question of the design of the London bus network and how it operates on the ground is a very big subject, and I spent 6 years of my career when Tony was running the tubes, running the buses myself, and trying to grapple with those issues about what is the optimum network. I think the first point to make is that what is right for central London is not necessarily right for inner London or for outer London. And my focus this evening has been on inner and outer London, not the centre, so forgive me if I concentrate on that. The improvements in London bus performance and the densification of the network that's taken place in the last decade, coupled with the Oyster card, have hugely increased the attractiveness and the use of buses. I think the figure is something like 40 or 45% increase in bus passenger kilometres in the last 10 years since mayoral election and the formation of TfL in the year 2000. And that's come about because of the factors that I mentioned. So something must be right. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't opportunities to optimise the network further, but I think the strength of the London bus network is that it does actually meet a very clear demand. Buses do go where people want to go. That's why they're so well used. The information that's now available, the spider networks as they call them, the journey planner on the TfL, the usual clarity of signing, the consistency of the bus destination indicators and all that, make the London bus network still, I think, one of the best in the, well, certainly the best in the UK, probably one of the best in the world. The issue is, can you make it more attractive to car users? Much of the growth of the 40% has not been attracting people out of cars. It's been increasing the frequency of bus use among existing bus users. And I speak of one myself. It hasn't got me to go by bus for journeys I would take by car. What it has got me doing is using bus more frequently for journeys I would be using buses or rail or getting around central London anyway. So it's done a great job, I think. There's still room for improvement. It costs a lot of money and there's a pressure on the subsidy at the present time. But I think it is a very effective network today, but I don't think it can make much more contribution to getting people out of cars because the journey patterns and the densities of movement, they probably reach the limit of the extent to which one can substitute for the other.
Thank you. One final, very quick question. Or is this a subject that nobody can actually think of a quick question to ask? Philip.
Philip Greenish from the Academy. My quick question is, you've touched on road charging in some specific examples. When are we going to get universal road charging in London?
I have always believed that there is a strong economic case for distance-based road user charging in London. But of course, an economic case isn't enough because it is a politically unpopular concept for reasons of history and I think government's not explaining road pricing very well, not always having consistent policies, the lack of trust that people have in what the government would do with the revenue. I mean, there are all sorts of reasons why it just doesn't politically run. If you say, well, if you ask the question, what is the path that will eventually lead to road user charging in a way that people feel is fair and which is also effective at managing demand and managing congestion, then I suspect that probably pockets of local charging which can be seen to deliver a demonstrable benefit probably are one of the stepping stones along the way. I know people didn't like the Western extension and Boris agreed to take it out, which he's in the rather long-winded process of doing at the present time. I don't think the Western extension was a very good example of the application of area congestion charging because it wasn't financially worthwhile, and I don't think it delivered anything like the benefits that the Central London congestion charge did. That is not to say that area charges in the right circumstances and designed in the right way cannot work. And I think it is both when it's possible to demonstrate that a succession of area charging can deliver benefits, tolls in certain places, that you can begin to, I think, see how you can migrate from that to a more universal system. But I think the key is going to have to be developing people's trust that the revenue is going to something that they're happy with and isn't just disappearing into the Treasury, and also that it isn't all additional cost, that there is some benefit that they obtain, and for that it probably needs to be a partial substitute for some of the existing road taxes.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure on behalf of everybody here, I'd like to thank you for the very thoughtful talk we've had this evening, and also for some of the politically interesting messages about tolling, about road charging, about building roads to match the predicted demand, and so on. It's a lot for us to think about. So thank you very much indeed, David.
Thank you.